And I'm a member of the Levin community and Salt and Light Lutheran Church. And there's lots of intersection and overlap and collaboration among um, those communities. And yeah, I wanted to share just an experience of one house meeting from a few years ago. It's been 4 or 5 years. I couldn't remember exactly, but I've been to a lot of house meetings with Levin and in the neighborhood. And this was one that really stood out to me. So I had brought this concept of the house meeting into the Cully neighborhood as a leader an organizer in the Cully neighborhood, and also as a leader with the Cully Housing Action Team. And we were seeking to listen to one another around our housing pressures. So I hosted this meeting in my home. And I remember it was my first time spending time with my neighbor, Annette, who I had met at Chat, the Cully Housing Action Team. And she and I actually hiked this morning in Forest Park together. So it was really beautiful to remember this first time we'd spent time together. I invited my neighbor, Lupe, who lived and still lives in the subsidized apartments across the street and gardened in our front beds. I remember a Spanish-speaking couple from the Arbor Mobile Home Park. There were also a few members of Levin who were homeowners and lived in the neighborhood. And Yenny, who lived then in an apartment with her family, shared her story with those of us gathered there. Her dream to own her own home and to have space for her family. And she shared about her fears of being displaced from the neighborhood where her kids were in school, where she had deep community. She and her husband are now the owners of a Habitat for Humanity house in the neighborhood, which is really exciting. But she vulnerably shared her story. And then in one-to-ones, we shared about the ways that her story touched ours. Then we connected what was stirring to larger pressures and ways that we might engage in our neighborhood. We saw connections that night that were so clear between housing pressures and immigration pressures. We spent some time wondering about that. We closed with lighting candles together, sharing our hopes for one another and for the community that we all love. For me, there was this beautiful energy stirring as the relationships deepened in that space and as we felt ourselves moving together little by little toward our next steps in our work around affordable housing, sanctuary, immigrant justice. So that house meeting was just one of a whole bunch of house meetings that were happening in the neighborhood. And we saw that they led to two really significant things. One thing was a stronger organized body that could come together and do powerful work around affordable housing in the Cully neighborhood. And it also was part of the process that helped our Levin community discern becoming a sanctuary and really build the capacity to make some significant change around these things. So some of the things that have come out of that are organizing to defend and even to collectively buy one of the mobile home parks in the Cully neighborhood, and also led to the Levin community becoming a sanctuary community and really closely connecting that sanctuary work with our housing work. So what are house meetings? House meetings, what do they do? So house meetings do some pretty significant things. House meetings deepen relationships. We get to know our own stories better, and we get to know one another's stories, and we listen for how those stories are woven into the larger story, the public story, the story of systems that press down and harm, and also the spirit story, where spirit is moving through us, leading us to creatively act together. House meetings are spaces where we can share information about a campaign that we might be working on, about research actions that we're doing. It's an opportunity to come together and to learn. House meetings help us identify leaders, and they help us to develop as leaders as we practice holding this sacred space, facilitating conversation, sharing our stories. I know it was one of the ways that I felt myself becoming an organizer was going to house meetings and going to house meetings and going to house meetings. And finally, house meetings move us toward public action. So After this series of house meetings is happening, leaders come together to share back what was heard in all of these meetings and listen deeply for what is emerging. And often from there, we'll plan a larger community um, discernment gathering or assembly to take action together, rooted in what is emerging and being woven through all of these stories. And now I'm going to pass it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Mira. So our goal is for all of our communities that are a part of the coalition to have house meetings in late January, February. And tonight, we want to teach you about house meetings by having one. We think that's the best way to learn. So we want you to taste and see what this can be like. So we invite you and welcome you to the Levin Community Land and Housing Coalition Multnomah County Advent House Meeting. Welcome. We invite you to fully participate as yourself, as one faith body that is being woven together through this coalition. A couple things are different. We're not in person, and that's okay. We're learning how to do virtual house meetings and actually can be really effective at it. Also, we're a bigger body than would normally be gathered for a house meeting, but that's okay. We can still do it with the number of people that we have on this Zoom call. We also, along the way, may do some like mini teachings because we're also, this is also our regular gathering. So tonight we will have just a house meeting agenda. We're in the welcome stage. We'll have spiritual grounding, someone will share their story. We'll have sacred encounters around one-to-ones, how their story touched our story and begin to share our stories with one another. We'll harvest and unveil the power we're building together and also the pressures. We'll have next steps, evaluation, a closing ritual, and then y'all will have time to be in teams if you would like to take that opportunity tonight. So welcome, bring your whole self, your head, your heart, your story, and I'm going to pass it to Reverend Maria McDowell, who's going to lead our spiritual grounding.
So I've been thinking a lot about darkness. We're surrounded by darkness in Oregon. We get a lot of it right now. And often our associations with darkness are negative. And that spills over into our conversations around race. That darkness is seen as a negative thing and being Black is negative. And I have really appreciated the work of the Reverend Dr. Will Gaffney, who has done a lot of work on Hebrew scripture around different ways of understanding darkness. And she reminded me, and so as I've read her, she reminded me that I actually grew up in a tradition filled with darkness. What I remember most about the churches that I grew up in is that the church was dark. There were always candles. Here there's the 3 Advent candles that are lit, the unlit 4th, and the Christ candle isn't lit yet. And then we were always surrounded by icons, by images of the saints that have gone before us, that form a part of the household of God. That's what the word ecclesia, church, really is. It just means household. And I remember that for me, darkness has always actually been really comforting. I like the quiet and the solitude of darkness. I like the comfort that it brings. I like the way in which darkness helps me focus and be present in a moment that I'm honestly not always very good at being present at. I'm always thinking about the next thing to do. So I just want to invite you for a moment to acknowledge the darkness that's around us. You may shut your eyes. You may look if you would like. Do what you need to do to just settle for a moment in darkness. And I'm going to just give us a little bit of silence. Friends, we are born and birthed in darkness. We are knit together in darkness. And it is sometimes at the darkest moments of our lives that we learn something about ourselves, that the truth is revealed. The truth about ourselves, the truth about those around us. Darkness is revealing. It is full of pregnant pauses, rich, layered silences. Darkness goes on forever, like space. It cannot possibly be fully explored. This is a time of light and darkness, of joys and griefs. And sometimes the things that bring us the joy are those moments of darkness, and the things that bring us grief may be the things that shine the brightest in our lives. Just invite you, and you can say this aloud or you can say it to yourself, but what would you like to put out into the darkness? One word, one phrase. What would you like to put out in the darkness? It doesn't mean giving it up. What would you like to put out there, knowing that it is in darkness that birth and revelation happens? Friends, let us pray. God of creation, God of darkness, and God of light. God of all that is and God of all that is being birthed. Be present with us as we walk with you in this time of darkness and of light. Enable us to see what it is you are calling us to see. Enable us to grow in the ways that you're calling us to grow, and enable us to rest in the ways that you are calling us to rest. May we be the household of God. May we be surrounded by all of those who have gone before us. May we be surrounded by Martin Luther King and Oscar Romero and Dorothy Day, Mother Maria Skopsova and Mary and Elizabeth and Mary the Magdalene. May we be surrounded by all of those who have known you in light and in darkness. Amen. And I am now going to invite Josh to lead us in telling our stories.
Yeah. Maria's going to invite me to invite Maria. It's actually what will happen. Hi, my name is Josh, and last time we got together, I told my personal housing story, and we heard a lot of feedback about wanting to hear more about how one tells their personal housing story. Understanding that it's not something maybe in the past that we have all talked about in polite company before. So we wanted to hear today Maria's housing story. Now, some people on this call have heard Maria's housing story before. Can you raise your hand if you've heard Maria's housing story before? Okay. Some people have. Awesome. I have not. I'm very excited. I've popped some corn and I'm ready to go. We're going to hear Maria's housing story, and then if we have time, I might ask a couple of follow-up questions or point to some things that I find particularly moving or that stand out in her story to me. So that introduction, Maria. Yeah. Can you tell me about your housing? What's been your journey?
So I grew up here in Portland, and my family is all still here in Portland. We have all spent time living in other places, but we've come back to Portland. And one of the things that has actually been a struggle for us as a family is to be able to afford to actually live in proximity to one another. And that, my mom, we grew up in Southwest Portland, almost Beaverton, like a few blocks away from Beaverton. And, it doesn't feel like a long way, but 25-minute drive across town feels a lot. Both my sister and I could not afford to purchase a home anywhere in the vicinity of where my mom currently lives. And one of the things that we've really struggled with is figuring out how to be together. And that's become more acute as my mom has aged and is less excited about driving at night. So we've become aware of how important neighborhood is and how difficult it is in a place like Portland to actually have neighborhood and to maintain that across generations. It's just not possible for us to do that. And I think when I came to St. Philip, honestly, I didn't really think a lot about my housing story until I began to hear the stories of people at St. Philip and became more aware of how much neighborhood has been lost in that, and how, Mother Alcina will tell the story of just, walking down Mississippi and people looking at her as if she doesn't belong. And yet she was born into that neighborhood in 1935. It's the loss of neighborhood and the loss of community, the loss of businesses, the places that you used to go hang out at when you were a child or a teenager that just aren't there anymore. And the loss of the way in which the being next to one another just builds relationships. I mean, you're next to people that you like and people that you don't like. And you get to know them, and you can, there's people in my parish who can tell me stories about what so-and-so did in high school. And I may not actually always want to know what they did in high school. But that kind of familiarity is lost in a city where we just can't live next to one another. And so that made me really aware of the ways in which St. Philip can be a community that addresses affordable housing. And that for me kind of underlies my motivation, is the awareness that people that I have come to love at St. Philip want to be able to enjoy something that's been taken from them in a much more significant way than my loss of neighborhood. And so being able to come together and figure out, how do we build a community that can help people stay, that can help people, even some people maybe as seniors return. We're thinking about senior housing, but be able to return so that, they can look out the window and see the street that they used to walk down when they were teenagers, so that they can, within walking distance, go to the coffee shop or the corner store. That's really important part of being rooted and being people who are connected to one another. And so for me, that underlies a lot of my motivation and desire to do what we're doing together as a community.
Okay. All right. Maria, thank you. Everybody, can we give Maria a silent round of applause? Thank you so much. I think it always takes courage for someone to tell their housing story, in my experience. And I just gratitude, Maria. Thank you very much. We might have time for maybe one question. I have one question and one reflection, and here's how I would like you to participate. If you would like, in an ideal world, like Melissa said, there'd be fewer people. We'd have maybe time to kind of like a couple people could chime in and maybe ask Maria a question. But I'm curious, for all of you who can hear me, was there a part of Maria's story that resonated with you? Just in like what you heard, and I'm really happy to say the one that it is for me, being far away from a parent, especially a parent that's becoming more vulnerable. I think I can feel that physically in my chest when you bring that up, and so that means a lot. And I was curious about your story. Was there ever a time that you thought you might not be able to stay in Portland, that you'd have to go like farther away for a while?
I sort of assumed that I would probably not be able to get a job back in Portland, and I've actually lived in Los Angeles, Iowa, and Boston for significant chunks of time. And I have to say, I love living in another place for about 2 or 3 years. And then I'm like, I hate this place. I just want to go back home. And home is always Portland. It's always Portland. And I just wasn't sure actually it would be possible. So I'm actually really grateful that I am able to be back in Portland, and have given up some things in order to be here. But yeah, I hope I don't ever have to leave again. But my wife and I have actually talked frequently about how it's, she wanted to be a midwife, and being a midwife in Portland is actually really hard because there's a lot of midwives, and she would have had a successful midwifery career in almost any other city in the country because it's too crowded for that in Portland. And so we thought about leaving.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Maria. Thank you to everybody who is pitching into the chat. Building community all the way. I want to hand this thing off now to Yasmin and LaVeta as we dig into our own housing stories.
Thank you, Josh. We're going to give you a chance to work a little bit more on your own public story. When you are talking about your own story, think about what you heard in Maria's story and think about what is the story that you want to tell. We have a lot of information, but what is this generational story, the pressures, the threats, and the opportunities, and where do those pressures come from that can help you frame your story of self? And then when you're thinking about yourself, how does your story connect with your family's story and the stories of others around you? So Maria saw in her story that sense of neighborhood, but then in the story of her parishioners, she heard that story of the loss of neighborhoods and was also beginning to experience that herself. So who is the we and the us you're connecting to? Take time to reflect on that. And who are you creating this story with and through? And then as you're thinking of the story of now, what is the urgency of the story that you have created? We heard in Maria's story, there's an urgency around feeling like I belong, knowing that we have a place to return home to when we are aging, not being isolated, but being able to be in community and neighborhood. So how does the story of us change and invite us into action? And what's at stake if we don't take that action? What's at stake if we do take it? You're going to have about 5 minutes or so to work a little bit more. This is the worksheet that we shared last time. And here is the link to access that worksheet, but just get a piece of paper or a journal that you keep and just flesh out a little bit more of your story. And then we'll come back together again and tell you what you get to do with that. Okay. All right. So Yasmin.
Hola, mi nombre es Yasmin y soy organizadora de la coalición de viviendas de Multnomah.
Hi, my name is Yasmin, and I'm an organizer with the Multnomah Land and Housing Coalition.
En unas reuniones reales en casa, tendrán uno a uno para compartir sus historias de vivienda.
So in an actual house meeting, you would have time to share your stories in one-to-one conversations.
Pagarán escuchando las presiones de viviendas de otras personas y los sistemas estructurales que causan presiones.
You would be listening for the other person's housing pressures and the systems and structures causing those pressures.
Prestarán atención a lo que los motiva a actuar para cambiar esas presiones y presentarán atención a la conexión entre ustedes.
You will be paying attention to what motivates them to act to change those pressures, and you will be paying attention to the connection between you.
Sin embargo, escuchamos la última vez que querían más tiempo para practicar sus historias públicas, así que esta noche tendrán esa oportunidad.
However, we heard last time that you wanted more time to practice your public stories. So tonight you will have that chance.
LaVeta nos va a compartir un poquito más.
And LaVeta's going to share a little more.
Tonight, you will have a chance to share your public story. First, you will decide who will be the first person to be a storyteller. And that storyteller is going to share their story as they have prepared it on their worksheet. And they will have 5 minutes to do that. And then we will give you a broadcast to you when that 5 minutes is up. And then the person listening will reflect back to that person. What was most powerful? What touched them? And what could make your story more powerful? And the storyteller will listen to that. And then we'll give you another warning that you now have 2 minutes. And during that time, the storyteller and the listener, can reflect back on what you heard and how to make your story more powerful. And then we'll give you a signal that says switch. And then the person who was the listener will then be the storyteller, and the person who was the storyteller will then become the listener.
Cuando le digamos que cambien hacia la otra persona, cambian. Y la otra persona luego compartirá su historia y ustedes escucharán y ofrecerán comentarios.
So when we tell you to switch, then switch. The other person will then share your story and you will listen and then offer feedback.
Emitiremos avisos al mismo tiempo para narrador y el oyente.
So we'll broadcast the same time prompts for the storyteller and for the listener.
Ahora tendremos el brote de 1 a 1.
And now we will have our one-to-one breakouts.
Lauren, I'm a member of the Levin design team and of the St. John's Church in North Portland. And together with Josh Dunham, we're going to lead you in a time of harvesting what has come from these stories, which is one of the best parts of a house meeting. So as we come back together as a large group, and before we start sharing with one another, I just want to invite you into your body. Our stories are powerful because they're ours and because they live in our bodies. And Josh, as he was reflecting on Maria's story, talked about how being far away from a parent, he could feel it in his chest. So take a moment, close your eyes if you need to, reflect on the story you just heard and where it's landing in your body. Maybe your heart is breaking. Maybe you feel it in your legs, like you're ready to move. Maybe your stomach is churning. Maybe it's a lump in your throat or tears in your eyes. What feelings or emotions are you experiencing in your body, having heard this story? And then I invite you in your body to do something to embody the connection that our stories have with one another. Maybe lay your hands on the place in your body where that story landed, or spread your arms as if you could touch the person in the Zoom screen next to yours. Maybe plant your feet on the ground, the same ground that someone else's feet is planted on. I just want to collectively thank each of us for the sacredness of these stories. We're going to take some time to harvest, to talk about how we're feeling, having heard these stories, what was powerful, what the housing pressures are that you're hearing, what is threatening the sense of home in our communities, and what are the systems and structures causing these pressures. So we can use the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself. And maybe we can pop those prompts in our chat box to just guide some reflection. But does anyone want to start? What are you feeling having had that sacred encounter, that one-to-one just now? Feeling connected and in community.
I think I would just like to share that the conversation that Lois and I had led to a sharing about our experiences of elders in our community and how financial pressures affect elders in our community and their children who are worried about them, and how we, it really touched something in my life that is deeply concerning to me. My career was in aging services, and I've done a lot of thinking about it, but I had not thought about this in relation to this housing cohort. And I see it is related to that, that we are all getting older, and we all have loved ones that are older. And we have a city, a world where, gosh, most people can't continue to live in their own house their whole life. And it's a scary for everybody, because most people know they cannot afford to provide for themselves in the long haul. And that is the world that we live in for all of us, kind of. And anyway, a light just came on that is related to what we're talking about here.
I love that. Both a sense of solidarity with the person that you shared with, a recognition of the systemic pressures on our aging population, and then seeing how your own life experience, your career is weaved into that. This is what the sacred unveiling is that Melissa talked about in that organizing spiral. Thank you, Joan, for sharing that. Anyone else?
I'll just lift up a couple from the chat box for those who are connecting via phone or not paying attention to the chat box. But Sarah G said that feeling both the impact of our role in neighborhood disbursement and gentrification was expressed in the conversation. Also, Josh Kingsley talks about the person he hit. Jeanette spoke about how minimum wage seems to keep housing out of reach. The ratio of wages to the cost of living is out of balance. Brent says, connecting the immigrant stories and struggles of previous generations with the current struggles of neighbors immigrants due to years of bad policy. Mira says, I heard the connection between domestic violence, immigration status, and the ability to find safe space, stable housing. Bernadine says, language around housing, rent, lease. Nellie wrote, how lack of affordable housing not only pushes people away from their communities, but also pushes them away from the ecosystem they created, but also from the resources they had.
Josh, can I share something quickly?
Yeah, please, Maria.
I keep hearing more every time I have a conversation with someone from my parish, and Bernadine and I were actually together, and I thought, I've heard Bernadine's housing story, but I learned some things today that I hadn't learned before. And she shared more about kind of her own coming to Portland with a whole gaggle of kids in tow and having to find housing, and the way in which it's so clearly important to give people a couch and a safe place to land. And I think there's just something about, you know, it's not just hearing the story once, but for me to hear it again, we tell it a little bit differently each time. And I feel like I heard something different about her passion and her heart, and why she feels so strongly about affordable housing and what she's afraid of, and like the ways in which housing and building housing has been used and abused in Portland. You know, that's a legitimate thing to be afraid of. And to hear like that again, it just made me really glad that I'm in this with the people that I'm in it with.
Well, thank you all for your reflections, and thank you for what you have put into the chat box. And if you have more things, feel free to put them in the chat box. What you all have said and shared is beautiful. And what you have done in this reflection time and also with your conversations is you've welcomed yourself into a sacred unveiling. You have welcomed yourself into the ability and seeing hearts touch each other, my heart and your heart in our conversation, where we've been able to actually start to push away the things that separate us. And we've started to be able to actually share some commonalities and see that our stories put us in the same place, that we're not alone, that we're doing this connected. It was a beautiful thing to be able to connect with Cynthia in my one-to-one and see some very strong similarities between our stories and the passions, and how that has helped us in understanding the reason that we're here and why we're doing this. One of the cores to remember as we go through the spiral, as we go through this process, as we come and move through and come to parts where we're taking action, public action, is the thing that will root us in this work is our stories and the interconnectedness of our stories. These stories have depth. I reflected and told Cynthia that I had to have many, many iterations of my story until I came finally to the core, the thing that actually rocked my soul to share, and actually said, this is my story. And this is what will keep me doing this work, even when it gets hard, is remembering this story. So as we are doing these things, and the beauty of a house meeting is that we can, together in a safe environment, with a small group, in comfort, share these stories of depth with each other and realize that we are better together, and that it breaks down this isolation. Even when we're doing it over Zoom, it can break down isolation. So that is, in a nutshell, why I believe that it's really important that we think about our stories and we engage them and we share them and we learn about them from each other, because it will get us through those hard parts, because I guarantee some of this stuff's going to be hard. And so we need to keep those things that keep us together in the midst of it. So now I'm going to invite Melissa and Mira to talk to us about next steps.
Thanks, Josh. So first, I'm going to bring us to a close as our Levin Land and Housing Coalition Advent House meeting, and say what you would say as you're coming to the close of your virtual house meetings. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being present as your full selves in this space. Thank you for sharing your stories and for listening deeply to those other folks gathered here and honoring their stories. We're reminded that this is just one house meeting among many house meetings that are happening. So remind your folks that they're part of a bigger movement as folks are gathering across the city and listening and sharing their stories. And we want to extend an invitation to upcoming gatherings. So invite your folks to the next discernment gathering or any upcoming concrete action steps. So as we come to a close, we want to invite people into action and into the next thing so that they're clear about what's the next opportunity to come together. All right, and now I'll pass it on to Melissa.
Thanks, Mira. Well, this is the actual next steps part of our coalition gathering for you all. And I'm going to ask LaVeta to share the next slide. And these are your next steps as core teams, is to meet with your congregational core team in the first half of January and plan your house meetings. Invite your design team companion. You have a companion that's been identified from the design team of this cohort. And we'd love to show up at your next core team and support you as you begin to plan and organize your house meetings. And we'll be sending an agenda for that house meeting and a worksheet in order to organize those house meetings. So do not fear, we'll be sending that by this Saturday so that when you meet, you'll have everything that you need to get going. And then bring your house meeting plan to our cohort gathering on Wednesday, January 27th. That's the next gathering we will have. We're getting back to our 4th Wednesdays of the month. It will be at 6:30, and we'll send out information on Saturday also for that meeting. And then we've recorded this gathering, so please share it with the core team members who couldn't make it. And as always, contact us along the way with any questions. I just want to say that I am incredibly grateful for your presence tonight. I feel the heaviness and the weight of our stories, but I also feel the not aloneness, the withness. And I'm a Christian pastor, and the word Emmanuel means God with us. And I feel that withness of sacred relationship in this room tonight. I'm mindful, like as I read the chat, that gosh, people have been displaced for years in our communities. And as faith communities, we own 609 buildable acres of land in this city. So we actually have the capacity and power potentially as faith communities to stabilize our neighborhoods and make accessible housing real in each neighborhood. And so I feel so grateful to be a part of this movement to change the story with you all. We want to move into evaluation, which we do as a part of our organizing spiral. We take a sacred pause to reflect, to digest, to learn together. And tonight we want to particularly focus on evaluating the house meeting because we want to learn from it. We want to learn what these house meetings do. So I just would invite you to, we're going to use the chat box, okay, to start with. So find that chat box because I would like everyone to participate in this. And the first question is that I'd love, how are you, think about how you felt when you arrived this evening, how you were feeling, and then how you're leaving how you feel as you are leaving tonight. So how did you arrive? And how are you feeling as you leaving? What's the shift that happened for you tonight through this house meeting? And please put that in the chat. The shift that happened for me is I'm feeling this way, or I moved from this to this. So what moved in you? How are you feeling now? What moved in you? I arrived tired and I'm leaving feeling energized. Thank you, Vicki. How are others feeling? How did you arrive? What's that shift? Energy was created in this meeting together, this house meeting. What else? Put it in the chat box. From weary to possibility. When we're alone in these pressures and they just feel like ours, we're looking out onto the sea of gentrification. Yes, weary, but we come together and we have some possibility. I arrived scattered and a bit overwhelmed with affordable housing process, and I'm leaving feeling more grounded in this work and connected to you all. I think that's Maria, and I'm so grateful for that. I arrived disuse and I feel more focused. I don't know what disuse is. I'm not smart enough for that word, but I hear that there's a sense of focus, or diffused. Maybe it was diffused. I arrived feeling shaky, leaving feeling connected to myself and others. Thank you, Jennifer. So we created connection. We created capacity for connection. I'm leaving from anxious to empowered. So we created power. The connection with the stories. was meaningful for Yasmin. I arrived in feeling alone to feeling so connected, Lauren offers. Now let's reflect on a little bit on the house meeting itself. And again, this was a little weird. I would just like to note that usually in one-to-ones, we're not like analyzing one another's stories. So just note that was different. That was mostly we'd be sharing the pressures of housing on our loved ones and what is breaking our hearts and what are the things we dream about in terms of housing. Those would be normal kinds of questions for a house meeting. Y'all wanted to practice, and so we practiced a little bit. But still, you got a sense of it. And so I would love to know, for you all, you felt that shift. There was energy was created. What did that energy do? What's it doing in our meeting together? What is powerful about house meetings, and what are they? What is that energy creating or making possible? Another way to think about this is if you had these house meetings in your congregation and with your neighbors and potential community partners, what would be different? What would shift? What might become possible? So what would they do to your people and your community? So let's put that in here. Something new happened. Bernadine says, feeling connected to others and what's ahead. So it might create new possibilities in your community. A growing sense of capacity was created. So you might move from feeling like we're not enough. I know this is true for most of our churches, and most of our churches are not like mega churches. Actually, I don't think anybody on this call is a mega church. We can feel like we don't have enough, right? But a sense of capacity can be developed. A sense of possibility, imagination can begin to be created through house meetings. I moved from feeling a little confused about the importance of this to feeling the powerfulness of the connection. So clarity can be developed through house meetings. Clarity of purpose, clarity of collective sense of vocation can be created in house meetings. What else could be shifted in your community? I just want you to think about it. If you had, let's say you had 5 house meetings and you had 35 people come to house meetings in your community, and it was a mix of congregation members, or maybe you had 20. I saw some folks on here who have pretty big congregations. You had 20 house meetings. You had 200 people, congregation members and neighbors and community partners, all in the same room. What is possible? I'm imagining the building of momentum and clarification of direction. That's what's said. So we sharpen. Those who don't feel like they have a housing story might find that they really do. It isn't always a dramatic thing. That's right. Sometimes our stories are subtler, but they create empathy to connect with the next person and the next. And again, we're not alone. I don't know about you, but did you see how many people led tonight who discovered their own sense of like ability to move others and connect with others and move towards something together? That's called leadership development. You can develop leaders in your community through these house meetings. You can, again, capacity is both relationships and the leadership capacity within our communities. And as Josh noted, or somebody noted earlier, this process of building affordable housing and changing systems and structures, it is long, hard work. And we need all the capacity we can get along the way. So I'm so grateful for each of you. Again, we're going to send you tonight to plan these house meetings in your own community. We'll be sending, again, a suggested agenda for those house meetings that you can tweak based on where your community is at in its process. And your companion will be there to support you in developing the strategy for these house meetings in your communities. So I just give thanks for each of you and your stories, your sacred stories that you bring together. And as we shed light on these stories, we now have the power together to start to create some new stories together. And I look forward and anticipate what that can mean and look like for us together. Mira is interpreting, so you're going to hear a lot of me because we just decided it would be easier this way. But we'd like to have a closing before we will give you the opportunity. We'll break you out into your teams if you would like to use some time together to just check in and maybe make that January core team meeting. Maybe it's not on the calendar yet, and you want to spend some time just tonight getting that on the calendar and seeing each other in the new year. The closing ritual, though, is related to darkness and light. And I'm so grateful for the grounding that Maria offered to us at the beginning. LaVeta, you can actually undo the closing ritual. And because I mostly want to be able to see each other's faces. So Mira has a candle that she has lit. And I was thinking about just the depth of darkness, that deep darkness, that mystery that we are in, the mystery of the womb, as Maria was talking about, that divine womb that we are all a part of. And also how in this season, in our various traditions, we are also lighting candles, which makes us both, I think, appreciate the darkness and the light when we have the juxtaposition of the two. And I was thinking about when I light candles in my communal life, and it's a lot actually, but I light candles often when I'm vigiling. The two spaces in my community's life when we'd sometimes communally light candles were when babies were going to be born, when we were waiting. Anybody else who light candles when babies are coming? And we're vigiling, we're just anticipating that life. And also when people are dying, when they're being midwifed into the eternal, to light candles and to anticipate that bigger, deeper, mysterious life that we are all being called into. And so tonight, I'm in this season for me as a Christian in Advent, I'm paying attention to holy anticipation. What am I vigiling for? What is the good news that has been promised that I am anticipating, that I am lighting a candle for, that I am waiting and watching actively to embrace? And so I invite you as we close to just offer, what are you vigiling? What is the good news that you're vigiling for in this season? And you can think about that as individually, as a person. Maybe it's something very personal, or maybe it's something collective in this cohort. I'm vigiling for the good news of breaking ground on affordable housing on our property, or that my neighbors get to stay, or whatever it may be. What is the good news that you're vigiling for, that you're anticipating in this season? So just bless us with those words of good news in the chat, or you can say them aloud, and we will depart into our team time in that way. I have to be honest, with all of the news of the vaccine, I am envisioning for embrace in this season. I'm lighting candles for embrace. So a vaccine, someone said. Vigilant for groundbreaking at Portsmouth Union by the end of the year. Yes, Portsmouth Union Church, our first project, is about to break ground by the end of the year. And we give thanks for that. I'm vigiling for connection, says Anna. Vigiling, anticipating the tiny home village opening soon at St. John's Church. Amen. So we have another moment. We can embrace good news through this coalition that there is a tiny home village in St. John's that will break ground in its own way. An extension on the moratorium on evictions. Yes, Vicki. Yes. What else are you vigiling for in this season? Hope. More equitable city codes that make shelter more accessible. Lois said the end of 2020. Just put it to bed, baby. Healing, Bernadine. Kindness. That Wilsonite School is renamed after Mercedes Diaz, a former member of St. Philip. Beautiful. That everyone may come home. Perseverance, peace. Good news for all people, not just a few. Tonight, my candle will be that all people have a place to lay their heads. Let us continue to vigil, paying attention and listening deeply into the mystery of one another's stories, with our neighbors, with our congregations, and open our arms wide to embrace the future that God has in store for us. Blessings to you all. We'll send you now into team time, and if you want to use that time, you can. We'll keep the team, the breakout rooms open and available for the next half an hour. And if you don't need that time tonight, then may you have a warm place to lay your head tonight, and may you have good sleep. And we'll see you in January. Blessings, everyone.